What happens when a 22-year-old nanny raises her hand and strikes the most feared crime boss in Chicago across the face? Silence. Dead silence. She thought she was signing her own death warrant to protect a terrified 6-year-old. Instead, that single echoing slap sparked a dangerous, twisted obsession. Chloe Hastings did not belong in the Gold Coast. She was a girl from the South Side, drowning under a mountain of past-due medical bills for her mother's aggressive lupus treatments. When the elite Wellington domestic agency called her with an expedited placement, offering a salary that looked like a typographical error, she didn't ask questions. She put on her only pressed blazer, tied her chestnut hair into a neat knot, and took the train to an address that didn't exist on standard GPS. The Russo estate was less of a home and more of a fortress. Hidden behind wrought-iron gates and 12-foot limestone walls, the sprawling mansion sat overlooking Lake Michigan. As Chloe approached the intercom, she noticed the cameras. They weren't just pointed at the gate, they were tracking her every movement. A man in a tailored charcoal suit opened the heavy mahogany front door before she even knocked. His name, she would later learn, was Carlo Rossi. He had the build of a heavyweight boxer and the cold, unblinking stare of a predator. "Miss Hastings," Carlo said, his voice a gravelly baritone that offered no warmth. "Follow me. Keep your eyes forward." Chloe gripped the strap of her tote bag, her knuckles turning white. The interior of the mansion was breathtaking, but suffocatingly cold. White marble floors, minimalist modern art, and a profound, unsettling silence. There were no sounds of children playing, no television murmuring in the background. It felt like a mausoleum. She was led into an expansive library that smelled of old paper, expensive leather, and a faint hint of bourbon. Sitting behind a massive oak desk was Dominic Russo. Dominic was 34, impeccably dressed in a black dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to reveal a canvas of intricate dark tattoos climbing his forearms. He had a jawline carved from granite and eyes the color of a winter sky, pale, piercing, and entirely devoid of empathy. He didn't stand when she entered. He simply looked up from the dossier on his desk. Her dossier. "Chloe Hastings," Dominic stated. It wasn't a question. 22. Early childhood education degree from Loyola, incomplete due to financial hardship. No criminal record. Desperate enough to take a job where the first rule is absolute silence. "I am a professional, Mr. Russo," Chloe managed to say, fighting the tremor in her voice. "And I am very good with children." Dominic leaned back, studying her like a chess piece. "My son Luca is 6. His mother died 2 years ago. Since then, he does not speak. Not a single word. Your predecessors tried to force him, tried to fix him. They were terminated. Your job is to keep him safe, keep him fed, and keep him out of my way. You do not ask about my business. You do not invite guests. You do not leave the grounds without Carlo. Do we have an understanding?" "Yes, sir." Chloe nodded. "Good. You start immediately." Meeting Luca broke Chloe's heart. The 6-year-old boy was small for his age, with a mop of dark curls and his father's pale blue eyes. But where Dominic's eyes were hard, Luca's were wide with perpetual fear. He sat in the corner of a playroom filled with untouched expensive toys, clutching a small worn-out plush wolf. Chloe didn't push. She didn't demand eye contact or speech. For the first 2 weeks, she simply existed in his space. She built elaborate forts out of blankets, read adventure books aloud, using funny voices, and left small, colorful drawings on his pillow. Slowly the ice began to thaw. Luca started sitting closer to her. He began handing her crayons when she colored. One afternoon when it was raining heavily, he crawled into her lap and fell asleep. It was a victory that brought tears to Chloe's eyes. But the closer she got to Luca, the more she realized the terrifying reality of the Russo household. Dominic was rarely home during the day, but the nights were a different story. Chloe's bedroom was down the hall from Luca's, and she was a light sleeper. She heard the screech of tires at 3 a.m. She heard the muffled, aggressive shouting in the downstairs foyer. Once she cracked her door open to check the hallway and saw Carlo walking past, a dark, unmistakable bloodstain soaking through the shoulder of his crisp white shirt. She was working for the Mafia. The realization didn't come as a sudden shock, but rather a slow, creeping dread. The news broadcasts she secretly watched on her phone confirmed it. Dominic Russo was the reputed head of the Chicago syndicate, currently locked in a brutal, escalating turf war with the Moretti crime family. Despite the danger, Chloe couldn't leave. The money was keeping her mother alive, and abandoning Luca to this cold, violent world felt like a betrayal she couldn't stomach. She became fiercely protective of the boy, shielding him from the dark reality of his father's life as best she could. But the violence was bleeding into the house, and Dominic was unraveling. The bags under his eyes grew darker. His temper, usually an icy, controlled simmer, began to flare violently at the staff. The tension in the mansion was a physical weight, a tightly coiled spring waiting to snap. And on one stormy Tuesday night in late November, it did. The storm outside was violent, lashing rain against the towering windows of the Russo estate, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside. Chloe had just put Luca to bed. The boy had been unusually restless, frightened by the thunder, so she had let him hold a small, delicate glass music box that had belonged to his late mother. It played a tinkling, melancholic tune that usually soothed him. At 11:30 p.m., the front doors burst open. Chloe heard the commotion from the second-floor landing. Dominic's voice boomed through the foyer, rough and furious. He was shouting at Carlo and 3 other men. "I told you to secure the docks. The Morettis burned $3 million of merchandise, and you left 2 of my men bleeding on the asphalt." Dominic roared the sound, echoing up the grand staircase. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She hurried down the hall to check on Luca, praying the noise hadn't woken him. But as she reached his door, she saw him standing in the hallway, clutching the glass music box to his chest, his eyes wide with terror as he stared down at the foyer. Before Chloe could reach him, a massive clap of thunder shook the house simultaneously, with Dominic violently kicking a side table downstairs. The sudden explosive sound startled the 6-year-old. Luca flinched violently. The glass music box slipped from his small hands. It hit the hardwood floor of the landing with a devastating high-pitched shatter. The delicate glass fractured into 100 pieces, and the tiny metal gears spilled out, playing a warped, broken note before dying completely. Downstairs, the shouting stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the noise. Dominic's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto the landing, taking in the sight of his trembling son and the shattered remains of his late wife's most prized possession. "No." Dominic breathed his voice, dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The men at the bottom, hardened criminals who feared nothing, physically stepped back, knowing better than to intervene when Dominic Russo looked like that. Chloe's instincts took over. She rushed forward, stepping in front of Luca just as Dominic reached the top of the stairs. Dominic didn't even look at her. His eyes were wild, consumed by grief rage and the adrenaline of a disastrous night. He reached around Chloe, his large hand gripping Luca's small arm. He didn't mean to hurt him, but in his blind rage, his grip was far too tight. Luca let out a choked, silent gasp of pain, his face contorting in terror as he tried to pull away from his towering father. "What did you do?" Dominic snarled at the boy, his voice vibrating with a terrifying intensity. "Do you have any idea what that was? You careless, stupid." "Let him go," Chloe shouted, trying to pry Dominic's iron fingers off the boy's arm. "Stay out of this, Nanny," Dominic growled, shoving her shoulder back with his free hand. The force nearly knocked her off her feet, but she caught herself on the wall. Dominic yanked Luca slightly closer, his face twisted in anger. Luca was openly weeping now, hyperventilating in absolute panic, trapped in his father's suffocating grip. Chloe saw red. The fear evaporated, replaced by a fierce maternal rage. She didn't think about the guns downstairs. She didn't think about the syndicate, or her mother's medical bills, or her own life. She only saw a terrified little boy being bullied by a monster. Chloe planted her feet, squared her shoulders, and swung her hand with everything she had. Smack! The sound of flesh striking flesh echoed through the cavernous hallway like a gunshot. Chloe's palm connected perfectly with Dominic's left cheekbone. The force of the blow snapped the Mafia boss's head to the side. Time stopped. Downstairs, the distinct metallic clack-clack of 3 handguns being drawn and cocked broke the silence. Carlo and the guards had their weapons aimed squarely at Chloe's chest. Chloe stood frozen, her hand still raised, stinging fiercely. Her breath hitched in her throat. "I'm dead," she thought. "I just killed myself." Dominic slowly turned his head back to face her. The red mark of her handprint was already blooming against his pale skin. His chest heaved. The wild, blind rage in his eyes fractured, replaced by absolute, unadulterated shock. No one touched Dominic Russo. Men who so much as looked at him wrong ended up at the bottom of the Chicago River, and a 120-pound nanny in a flannel pajama set had just struck him across the face in his own home. Dominic looked from Chloe's defiant, terrifyingly brave face down to his hand, which was still gripping Luca's arm. He saw his son trembling, staring at him, not with respect, but with pure horror. Slowly, as if moving through water, Dominic released the boy. He looked back at Chloe. The dangerous storm in his eyes shifted into something completely unreadable. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He didn't yell. He didn't strike her back. He simply raised a hand, gesturing to the men downstairs to lower their weapons. Without a single word, Dominic stepped over the shattered glass of the music box, walked down the hallway, and disappeared into his master suite, slamming the door shut with a finality that shook the walls. Chloe immediately dropped to her knees, pulling a sobbing Luca into her chest. She wrapped her arms tightly around him, rocking him on the floor amidst the broken glass, her own tears finally spilling over. "I've got you," she whispered into his dark curls, her voice shaking violently. "I've got you, Luca. It's okay." She spent the rest of the night packing her suitcase. She knew how these things worked. She would be fired by sunrise, if not worse. She wrote a careful list of instructions for Luca's routine and left it on the nightstand, her heart breaking at the thought of leaving the boy. At 6 a.m., there was a heavy knock on her bedroom door. Chloe took a deep breath, zipped her suitcase, and opened the door. Carlo stood there, his face an impassive mask. "Get your bag," Chloe asked quietly, resigning herself to her fate. "Leave the bag," Carlo grunted. "The boss wants to see you in his study. Now." Chloe's stomach plummeted. This was it. The execution. She walked down the hallway like a woman marching to the gallows. The library doors were open. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, staring out the window at the grey morning light over the lake. He wore a fresh shirt, but he looked like he hadn't slept a wink. The red mark on his cheek was still faintly visible. "Close the door," Dominic said softly. Chloe did as she was told, standing rigidly in front of his desk. "Mr. Russo, I am packed. I will leave quietly. I just ask that you please find someone who will be patient with Luca." "Sit down, Miss Hastings," Dominic interrupted, turning his chair to face her. Chloe blinked, hesitating, before slowly lowering herself into the leather chair opposite him. Dominic leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, clasping his large hands together. His pale blue eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Chloe saw an exhaustion so deep it looked agonizing. "Do you know how many men have tried to put their hands on me in the last 10 years? Dominic asked, his voice a low rumble. "Dozens. They are all dead." Chloe swallowed hard, gripping the armrests. "Last night," Dominic continued, his gaze unwavering, "I lost control. The business, it has been bleeding into my home, bleeding into my head. I looked at my son, and for a second I didn't see him. I just saw failure. I saw my own failure as a father." He paused, a heavy silence hanging between them. "If you hadn't stopped me," he whispered, a hint of real vulnerability cracking his hardened exterior, "I might have bruised him. I might have broken the only good thing I have left." Chloe sat stunned, unable to process the words coming from the ruthless crime lord. Dominic reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the polished oak. "I had Carlo look into your mother's accounts, the debts at Northwestern Memorial. They are paid in full. This envelope contains next year's salary, in advance, doubled." Chloe stared at the envelope, her mind spinning. I don't understand. You aren't firing me." Dominic stood up, walking slowly around the desk, until he was standing mere inches from her chair. The sheer size of him, the intoxicating scent of sandalwood and danger, overwhelmed her senses. He leaned down, placing a hand on the arm of her chair, trapping her in his intense gravity. "Firing you," Dominic murmured, his voice dropping to a husky, dangerous register that sent a shiver straight down Chloe's spine. "Miss Hastings, you are the only person in this god-forsaken city who isn't afraid to put me in my place to protect my son. You aren't leaving this house. In fact, you're never leaving his side again." He leaned in closer, his breath ghosting over her ear, the raw power of the Chicago syndicate, suddenly feeling intimately, terrifyingly focused entirely on her. "And," Dominic added, his eyes dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second, "if you ever slap me again, Chloe, make sure we are alone." The dynamic inside the limestone fortress on the Gold Coast shifted entirely after that morning in the library. Dominic Russo, the terrifying phantom of the Chicago syndicate, began to materialize in the daylight. He started canceling morning meetings to eat breakfast with Luca and Chloe. He replaced his customary scowl with a watchful, heavy gaze that tracked Chloe's every movement around the mansion. The suffocating silence of the estate was gradually replaced by the soft hum of life. Dominic even ordered a grand piano to be moved into the sunroom after learning Chloe used to play for her mother. The first time she sat down and played a hesitant rendition of Debussy, she looked up to find Dominic, standing in the doorway, staring at her with an intensity that made her pulse thunder in her ears. But outside the wrought iron gates, the city of Chicago was burning. Lorenzo Moretti, the aging, desperate head of the rival faction, was losing territory rapidly. Dominic's brutal efficiency in the underworld was unmatched, and his recent retaliation for the dock fire had crippled the Moretti supply lines. Driven into a corner, Lorenzo decided to break the oldest rule of the syndicate. He ordered a hit on the family. He wanted Dominic's heart served to him on a silver platter. The threat level escalated so severely that Dominic confined Chloe and Luca entirely to the grounds. For 6 weeks they did not breathe outside air that wasn't filtered through the estate's security grid. But Luca was changing. He was healing. He hadn't spoken a word yet, but his night terrors had stopped, and he was drawing vibrant pictures instead of scribbling in black crayon. Dr. Aris Thorne, a highly discreet pediatric trauma specialist located in Streeterville, insisted on an in-person evaluation to assess his progress. Dominic fought the idea violently, but Chloe, emboldened by her new standing in the house, pushed back. He needs this, Dominic. He needs to know he isn't a prisoner in his own home. Carlo will be with us. 5 guards. We take the armored SUV. It's an underground private garage, straight to a private elevator. Reluctantly, Dominic agreed, though the muscle in his jaw feathered with suppressed anxiety as he watched them pull out of the driveway. If so much as a tire loses pressure, you call me, Dominic had instructed Carlo, his eyes dark with warning. They arrived at the Lurie Children's Hospital Annex in Streeterville without incident. The appointment went beautifully. For the first time, Luca laughed out loud at something the doctor said, a bright, beautiful sound that brought tears to Chloe's eyes. The nightmare began on the way out. They took the private elevator down to the subterranean VIP parking level, P4. The concrete cavern was dimly lit, echoing with the dull hum of ventilation fans. Carlo stepped out first, his hand resting casually inside his suit jacket. 2 other syndicate guardsmen named Miller and Hayes flanked Chloe, who was holding Luca's hand tightly. As they walked toward the black armored Cadillac Escalade, the hairs on the back of Chloe's neck stood up. The silence in the garage felt different. It wasn't empty. It felt drawn like a breath held right before a scream. Carlo stopped dead in his tracks. He raised his hand, a sharp, silent command to halt. "Get them in the car," Carlo barked at Miller. "Now." Before anyone could move, the harsh screech of tires echoed through the concrete structure. A battered grey van accelerated from the shadows of the lower ramp, smashing directly into the side of the Escalade, pinning the driver's side door shut. Simultaneously, 3 heavily armed men stepped out from behind the concrete pillars. They weren't wearing masks. In the Mafia, if they didn't wear a mask, they didn't plan on leaving any witnesses. "Down!" Carlo roared, drawing his weapon and firing in a single fluid motion. The garage erupted into deafening chaos. The concussive boom of gunfire echoed off the concrete, vibrating violently in Chloe's chest. Glass shattered like rain. Chloe didn't freeze. The maternal instinct that had possessed her the night she slapped Dominic roared back to life. She tackled Luca to the oil-stained pavement, rolling them both behind the thick steel of a structural support column. "Stay down, Luca, cover your ears!" she screamed over the deafening pops of automatic weapons. Luca was curled into a tight ball, his eyes squeezed shut, shaking violently. She peeked around the concrete. Miller was on the ground, motionless. Hayes was suppressing fire toward the van, but he was pinned behind the trunk of the Escalade. Carlo was a machine, moving with terrifying precision, but he was outnumbered. Then the true horror revealed itself. A 4th man casually stepped out of the emergency stairwell, just 10 feet from where Chloe and Luca were hiding. He wore a sharp suit and a Chicago Police Department badge clipped to his belt. It was Detective Harrison, one of the supposedly bought and paid for cops on Dominic's payroll who frequented the estate. He had sold them out to Lorenzo Moretti. Harrison ignored the firefight. His eyes locked directly on the concrete pillar where Chloe was sheltering the boy. He raised his service weapon, a sickening smirk twisting his face. "Nothing personal, sweetheart," Harrison called out over the gunfire. "Moretti sends his regards to the boss." There was no time to scream. There was no time to beg. As Detective Harrison closed the distance, raising his gun toward Luca, Chloe realized she had absolutely nothing to lose. Her eyes darted wildly and landed on a heavy red steel fire extinguisher mounted on the wall just inches from her shoulder. With a surge of adrenaline so powerful it blurred her vision, Chloe ripped the extinguisher from its metal housing. As Harrison rounded the pillar, stepping into point-blank range, Chloe didn't cower. She swung the heavy steel cylinder with every ounce of strength in her body. The heavy bottom edge of the extinguisher connected brutally with Harrison's wrist. The sickening crack of bone was masked by the gunfire, but the gun clattered uselessly to the concrete. Harrison let out a howl of agony, stumbling backward. Chloe didn't stop. She lunged forward, slamming the body of the extinguisher directly into the corrupt detective's face. Harrison collapsed backward onto the pavement, completely unconscious, blood pooling from his broken nose. Suddenly, the deafening squeal of heavy tires and the blinding glare of high beams flooded the subterranean level. 3 black SUVs tore into the garage at 50 miles an hour, completely disregarding the ramps slamming into the concrete dividers. The doors flew open before the vehicles even came to a complete stop. Dominic Russo had arrived. He stepped out of the lead vehicle holding a military-grade rifle. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like the devil himself. The air in the garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. The remaining Moretti hitmen realized exactly who had just arrived. Panic set in. One tried to run toward the stairwell. Dominic's men cut him down in seconds. The firefight was over in less than 30 seconds, brutally and decisively finished by the sheer overwhelming force of the Chicago Syndicate's apex predator. When the last shell casing hit the floor, complete silence returned to the garage, save for the hissing radiator of the crashed van. Dominic dropped his weapon, ignoring his own men, ignoring the bodies, and sprinted toward the structural column. "Chloe Luca!" His voice cracked raw with a terror no one had ever heard from him. Chloe crawled out from behind the pillar, her hands covered in dust and grease, pulling Luca tightly against her side. Her blazer was torn, her knees were scraped and bleeding, but she stood tall. Dominic crashed to his knees on the filthy concrete, pulling them both into a desperate, crushing embrace. He buried his face in Chloe's neck, his broad shoulders shaking. For the first time in his life, the impenetrable boss of the Chicago Mafia wept. "I've got him," Chloe whispered, her hands tangling in Dominic's dark hair, holding him just as tightly. "He's safe, Dominic. He's safe." Luca reached up with his small, trembling hands and grabbed his father's face. He looked at Dominic, then at Chloe, and finally, after 2 years of complete silence, a tiny, raspy voice echoed in the quiet garage. "Papa," Luca whispered. "Chloe saved us." Dominic froze, staring at his son in absolute shock. The sound of his son's voice broke whatever remaining walls existed around his hardened heart. He kissed Luca's forehead fiercely, then turned his intense, burning gaze to Chloe. "You!" Dominic breathed his voice thick with emotion. He reached out gently, wiping a streak of dirt from her cheek, his thumb lingering on her lips. "You fought for him. Against an armed man." "I told you," Chloe said, a breathless, shaky laugh escaping her lips. "I am very good with children." Dominic stood up, pulling Chloe to her feet, keeping Luca safely in his arms. He looked around the carnage, then back down to the fierce, brilliant woman who had fought like a lioness to protect his blood. That night, back in the absolute security of the Gold Coast mansion, Lorenzo Moretti was found dead in his own heavily guarded penthouse. The syndicate war was over. Dominic had eradicated the threat completely and permanently. In the quiet hours of the morning, Chloe stood on the balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, the cold wind blowing through her hair. She felt a heavy, warm jacket drape over her shoulders. Dominic stepped behind her, wrapping his strong arms securely around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. "The debt is gone," Dominic murmured, his lips pressing softly against her temple. "The threat is gone. You don't have to stay here, Chloe. You have enough money to take your mother anywhere in the world." Chloe leaned back into his embrace, her hands covering his where they rested over her stomach. "Are you trying to fire me again, Mr. Russo?" Dominic turned her around in his arms, his pale blue eyes stripping away every defense she had. There was no Mafia boss standing in front of her anymore. It was just a man, hopelessly, deeply in love. "I am trying to marry you, Chloe," Dominic said, his voice a low, vibrating promise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box, flipping it open, to reveal a diamond that caught the pale morning light. I need you. Luca needs you. Be my queen. Rule this house, rule me. Just promise you'll never leave my side. Chloe looked up at the man who had terrified her, challenged her, and ultimately surrendered his entire soul to her. She reached up, cupping his jaw, right where she had slapped him all those months ago. I promise, she whispered, right before Dominic lowered his head and kissed her, sealing a dangerous, beautiful vow that no one in Chicago would ever dare to break. Did Chloe make the right choice, staying with a ruthless mafia boss? Or is she playing with a fire that will eventually burn her? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this thrilling tale of danger, fierce loyalty, and unexpected romance kept you completely on the edge of your seat, please make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, gripping weekly storytelling.